Добрый день, уважаемые друзья. Меня зовут Леонид Калитеня, я продюсер независимого кино, и я приветствую вас на нашем канале «Оглядываясь на будущее». Наш канал посвящен культуре памяти. Сегодня мы будем говорить о культуре памяти в Германии. Говорить мы будем с Габриэле Фрайтаг, доктор истории, которая специализируется на Восточной Европе, а также она является исполнительным директором немецкой ассоциации изучения Восточной Европы. У нее есть богатый опыт работы с этим предметом, и мне кажется, ее мнение будет для вас достаточно интересным, возможно, даже где-то откровенным. Hello, Gabriele. Nice to see you.
Hello, Leonid.
To start our conversation from the maybe simple, but maybe not simple question about different memory cultures in Germany. And the question is, how did the division of Germany into East and West lead to formation of different memory cultures? And how did these differences affect each side's integration into their respective political and security blocs after World War, and also much more interesting after the unification of the Germany?
Thank you. This is a big question.
Yes, I know.
Yes, I think the political developments of both countries, East and West Germany, after 1945 and then especially after 1949, did shape the memory cultures in both countries. And so I will briefly outline the developments in both countries and why these memory cultures so much depended on how the countries positioned themselves. The division of Germany, of course, was the effect of National Socialism and then the defeat at the end of the Second World War. So, and in 1949, Germany ended up in being divided into two countries. You had the federal German state and the German democratic state, the West Germany, which legally became the successor of Nazi Germany, was, of course, a product of the Western Allies and tried, of course, to be integrated into the Western Alliance, which, of course, meant the Western European countries, as well as the transatlantic alliance of the NATO security bloc. And coming to terms with its own past was kind of entrance ticket for Western Germany to be accepted as a partner. And this meant for official state memory that Western Germany had to accept being guilty of National Socialism, of the Second World War and its atrocities, especially with regard to the atrocities that happened in the Western Hemisphere, I should say. There was a special focus in the beginning of what happened in Western Europe. And so it was very important for Western Germany to declare its being guilty, which also then resulted in even payments for certain groups of victims of National Socialism. And so you can see that West Germany's goal to integrate itself into these Western Bloc meant that it had to accept this being the legal successor, and also accepting its guilt, especially vis-a-vis those groups of victims that were accepted by the Western allies as the most important ones. And the same, to a certain extent, also goes for East Germany. East Germany, after the Second World War, and I mean especially after 1949, after GDR was founded, had to integrate into this Warsaw Alliance, what we often call also the Warsaw Pact countries. And it did so in a way by not especially accepting its guilt, but accepting also West Germany as the legal successor of Nazi Germany, and thus framing West Germany also as a kind of further fascist state, while itself accepting certain atrocities and a certain war guilt, especially with regard to the countries of the former Soviet Union, that were quite quickly accepted as, and rightly, of course, as victims of National Socialism, and especially the Second World War. And so this was the general setting. And the interesting thing is that what in the beginning was a political ratio, so to say, had a political rationality, by and by also was reflected in the collective memory in both countries, in West and East Germany. I mean, if we look back to the 1950s, I think we should admit that most Germans saw themselves as the first victim of National Socialism. And it took Germany quite a while. The German public, it took the German public about 20 years to start really reflecting about what happened during fascism, during National Socialism, and during the Second World War. And also accepting the war crimes was a process that only started in the 1960s, I would say, and by the way, is still going on. And so let's again have a look first at West Germany. As I said in the beginning, for the 1950s, I should say, Germans were mostly occupied with their own situation. And of course, you had a huge population that already at the end of the war and then right after the war had to flee from those territories that are nowadays Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, etc. So most Germans saw themselves in the position of victims in the 1950s. And this started, when I talk of Western Germany, this started to change in the 1960s. Due to also judicial processes that took place, the so-called Auschwitz processes you may have heard of in the middle of the 1960s in Frankfurt am Main, where for the first time you had a huge number of victims, former victims of the ghettos, concentration camps, who gave evidence of what happened. And this was quite influential, I would say, for a first consciousness, for starting a collective consciousness in Western Germany of a certain guilt vis-a-vis especially Jews. I would like to say that so Western Germany started to accept that the Holocaust, a term that then became more common in the 1970s, that Germany certainly was guilty of committing this Holocaust. This was something that became quite clear for most Germans in the 1960s and in the 1970s. Although interestingly enough, I think most people associated this Holocaust with the fate of Jews in Germany or in the Western countries. It still took the West German society quite a while to realize that most atrocities vis-a-vis Jews took place in Eastern Germany. So, but Jews were then accepted as and the Holocaust were accepted as really German guilt, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a look at Eastern Germany, people in Eastern Germany, also due to the political circumstances, started to realize far earlier that it was the Soviet people that did really suffer during the Second World War. And when they talked of the Soviet people, I mean, I suppose that it was always the Soviet or Russian. You used both terms identically,
Mm-hmm.
which is something you had in West Germany as well. And this also has repercussions that we see still today. But so I think for a lot of people in Eastern Germany, it became clear that yes, the population on the territory of the Soviet Union, of the then Soviet Union, really suffered during the occupation. While they would not realize that a huge proportion of these people were Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And they would not really realize that it was not just the Russians who suffered, but that, of course, you had Ukrainians, Belarusians, people in Moldova and other Soviet republics who also suffered a lot from the war. And you can see this also if you have a look at historical research. Historical research on the Holocaust, I think, in Western Germany becomes really prominent in the 1960s and 1970s. While in the GDR, you get research on the fate of forced laborers,
Mm-hmm.
so-called Ostarbeiter, already during the 1960s, at a time when in Western Germany, hardly anyone realized this group as also a vital and substantial group of victims of National Socialism. So this is how you see that there was a lot of political rationality in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
when also a kind of public cultural memory was produced.
Mm-hmm.
But it by and by resonated with the consciousness of the common people in both countries. And it is very interesting because there was a very interesting historical oral history project that was carried out in the 1980s
Mm-hmm.
by the historian Lutz Niethammer. And he and his team, they conducted in the 1980s interviews in West and East Germany. And they talked to common people and asked them about their memory on National Socialism, the Second World War, and on main victim groups. And the results of this project show very clearly that West German interviewers would give Jews as a prominent example of a group that suffered under National Socialism, while people in East Germany would mainly refer to the people of the Soviet Union or the Russians.
And if to continue, but after the unification of the Germany, how these two types of culture, did they were mixed, or did they just one culture disappear? How they deal with each with other? Because this is two different stories.
Yeah, I think these were two different stories. I think the two narratives maybe already started to merge in the 1980s. In West Germany, by that time, you also had very good historical research on the fate of forced laborers, and also especially on the fate of forced laborers also in East Germany, in Eastern Europe. And this also helped to foster further consciousness in the West German public. You had these so-called, you had these amateur history groups in various local communities who started to research history on the ground, what happened in their own cities, which kind of victim groups did you have in your own city. And so there was already a growing consciousness in West Germany concerning the fate of people in Eastern Europe, while also I think there was a growing consciousness in East Germany concerning the Holocaust and the German war guilt vis-a-vis Jews. And I think after reunification, these collective memories, I would say they constantly merged. And a very good example for this is the setting up of a foundation that made payments to former forced laborers of National Socialism in the 2000s. The foundation was set up in the very beginning because German industry faced real pressure from the United States. There were class actions, people sued German enterprises in the United States for having employed forced laborers. And it became pretty clear for German industry that somehow they had to react. They were losing economic ties, they were losing partners, especially in the US, due to their own history. So it became clear for huge enterprises that they somehow had to react. Simultaneously, there was a political will within the political establishment of Germany, of then reunified Germany. You had a coalition of the Social Democrats and the Green Party for the first time. And especially the Green Party also pushed for accepting forced laborers as a group of as a victim group of National Socialism that should get some kind of compensation. But this, of course, meant that the German state was willing to pay quite a substantial amount of money, tax money, of course,
Mhm.
And the interesting thing is that I would say in the early 2000s, there was a general consensus within the German public that yes, it is right. These groups are victims of National Socialism. A lot of them have never been acknowledged as such, and they should get some kind of compensation. It is difficult to use this term compensation because it was not a proper compensation, but at least they should get some kind of symbolic and financial and financial help. Yeah. This was in the early 2000s. And so I think what was important at that time that you had the German economy understanding they would have to react to some extent and should do so for economic reasons. You had a coalition, a political coalition that also was willing to take this up as a political duty. But you also had I would say, quite a huge consensus within German society.
Mhm.
So I think this was, in a way, a unique political and social setting at that time. And to go on, I think both memory cultures, as I said, merged to a certain extent after reunification, and the setting up of this foundation that made payments to former victims of forced labor is a good example for this. And I don't think that nowadays you have these clear-cut division any longer between a West German consciousness or West German memory culture and an East German memory culture. But I think, again, we have diverging ways of looking back at the times of National Socialism and the Second World War due to different political views. Germany, as many countries in Europe and outside Europe, is getting more polarized. We have, unfortunately, in Germany nowadays, a rising right-wing party, the so-called AfD, and we also have other right-wing extremist groups within Germany that unfortunately get increasing support. And politicians at the very far right end of our party spectrum and those who support them do no longer agree to the consensus of Germany being really guilty of the atrocities of World War II and National Socialism, or will no longer accept the fact that this was really what one could call a breach of civilization. In Germany, Zivilisationsbruch.
Mhm.
And this means that, again, you have diverging tendencies of memory culture depending on how you nowadays position yourself politically. And the way you position yourself politically nowadays has a direct impact on how you assess the past and how you assess Nazi atrocities.
I want to ask, if you're speaking about the right-wing parties, if they collecting the popularity, is it means that they offering as a solution about this guilty, or they want what they offer to the audience? what's the piece of cake? Why people so interested in this rethinking of the memory about the history?
Mm.
Did they maybe exactly there are we have approximately 75 years after the ending of the war, so maybe we should rethink the positioning about the guilty about everything. So maybe they offering some solution to the white audience, and the white audience says, yes, okay, we not need to pay for years, for ages. So let's think this is new world after the war, and let's think other way. What's the offer of these parties? Why
Mm.
they increase popularity?
Mm. I think you have those who simply deny the atrocities. I think this is a minority, but of course you have them, those who say these are all lies and things simply didn't happen. But then I think with rising anti-Semitism, unfortunately also in Germany, again, we see rising anti-Semitism in Germany. You, of course, also get those who say the Jews are to be blamed themselves. And I think these are narratives, and to a certain extent, you may always have had a certain amount of population believing in these narratives, but they were a kind of taboo. And I feel that these taboos are now breaking up. And I think there are certain narratives that become increasingly popular. And yes, of course, you are right that there are also those who say, well, these atrocities happened, but as you said, 75, 80 years ago, why care about them any longer? I think those who stress that it is important to care about the past, that it is important to understand what happens, and that it is important to remember the past, are especially those who think that the past and atrocities in the past may tell us something about how we should safeguard our current democracy and how we should safeguard peaceful relations with our neighbors, for instance. But people draw very different conclusions from this aspect of peace as a vital value, especially in the current situation with the Russian war against Ukraine.
I don't like to follow, but it's difficult to escape because when you started to spoke about the anti-Semitism, but we have not only right wing of this wave, there is left wing of this wave. I meant the situation in Gaza, because the Jews, I mean Israeli state, that they are concessors, they are occupied, and so on. These narratives are going hand by hand, step by step, with the narratives about the right wing. And I think this is the big dangerous. I don't like to follow this way, but we cannot escape, because at the moment, right now, started half years ago, I'm very afraid about combining of two narratives, because it is easy to defeat right narrative because we have evidences, we have a lot of materials, but this is new narrative, could be some kind of pillar or support that the right narrative also has some piece of truth.
Mm-hmm.
The anti-Semitism wave, I think now is very big. And do you think that is this thing, how these things mix it on, or how they dealt with these two types of memories in Germany, Eastern and Western. So could you comment a little bit about this new situation, half of year? Because I think if we escape, this will be not right way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think the current situation and the war in Gaza really makes us more conscious about this danger from left-wing anti-Semitism, because we have been concentrating over the last years very much on right-wing anti-Semitism, which of course is very dangerous. Unfortunately, I can't tell yet to what extent this left-wing anti-Semitism that we see now will have an impact on memory cultures concerning National Socialism and the Second World War. This is a very interesting, very important question, but I still cannot tell to what extent this already has impact, or so this is something that really needs more research. I find it a very interesting and important question, but there is one aspect that we may follow. This left-wing anti-Semitism also, of course, resonates with Muslim migration groups in Germany. And of course, for a lot of migrants in Germany is becoming increasingly a country of immigration. If people like it or not, it is a fact. Mm-hmm. And there has already been an increasing discussion, I would say over the last 15 years already. How do we teach the history of National Socialism to youngsters who have a completely different family background and who cannot relate the history to the history of their grandparents and great-grandparents? So this has already been a topic of discussion, and new projects have been launched, and I think textbooks for schools do reflect this now. So this has been a discussion going on for quite a while. How do we explain to youngsters who don't have the classical German background, how do we explain the history of fascism to them and what it means for the German state, and how can you explain to them that Germany as a state does have a responsibility for its past? So this has been a discussion going on over the last 15 years. And now, of course, you see a kind of new coalition between left-wing activists in Germany, with my migration background or not, and a Muslim migration community that, of course, especially with regard to Israel and Gaza, also shows a growing anti-Semitism. But as I said before, this is something I cannot tell to what extent it already has an impact on memory culture, but it certainly should be a topic of research.
Mm-hmm. I want also, if we started about the challenges, what are the kind of challenges you can say about what staying in Germany, which are connected with culture of memory culture? Mm-hmm. Except the anti-Semitism and this Muslim influence, maybe what other challenges exist at the moment?
Mm-hmm. I mean, due to the fact that that we are now nearly 80 years after the end of the Second World War, you hardly have any more survivors. Over the last 30 years, I think it was quite classical for survivors of the Holocaust or of other victim groups to go to schools, to talk to pupils in various settings. And there already has been a growing discussion, how can we translate the story of National Socialism when we don't have any eyewitnesses any longer. So this is one discussion that is going on. But also, of course, I mean, the fact that over the last 60 years, always due to the current political situations, ever new groups of victims became more public in the consciousness of the people, shows that the reflection on National Socialism, of course, never ends. And so we always have to see and have to be conscious of to what extent our current political situation shapes our views on the past. As I said, if you take Western Germany, the first groups of victims that people regarded as classical victims were Jews. Then, of course, you had, as I said, forced laborers. Then you had Sinti and Roma as a group that was still neglected up to the 1980s, and I would say only in the 1990s and especially in the 2000s, Sinti and Roma also became visible as victims, as vital groups of victims of National Socialism. You had homosexuals. Their fate also became more and more public. So always depending on current political debates in Germany, there is a growing consciousness for certain groups in the past. But as you said yourself, if we take Gaza now, it is, and this would be a real challenge, it might be that in the general public, the perception of Gaza and the role of Israel in this conflict might also shape the memory culture concerning the Holocaust.
Mhm.
And this, of course, would be a huge challenge.
Mhm. If we're speaking about the challenges, and you're speaking about public discussion, what state of public institution, in your point of view, could be involved in finding solution for these challenges? I don't know, when we spoken with our speaker, he says that mostly the cultural institutions is about exhibition, it's about the common concerts, how to unite people after the splitting into different position. But what, as I see, so complicated situation in Germany in nowadays, what do you think? What kind of policies could be provided to find solution, to implement this solution? not to get the polarized society when one part hates other part, especially in so squeezed by social networks world.
Mhm, mhm.
What do you think about the solutions?
Yeah, I think first of all, you have, I think it is important to see that we always have a wide range of, let's say, media or formats that can help to raise our awareness for the past. You already mentioned exhibitions. And I think exhibitions can play a vital role. And by the way, in the early 1990s, there was an exhibition in Germany on the atrocities of the Wehrmacht, of the German army, and especially in Eastern Europe. And although this was in the beginning of the 1990s, I mean, nearly 50 years after the end of the Second World War, this exhibition about the role of the Wehrmacht, not the SS, everyone democratically minded accepted that the SS certainly was a bunch of perpetrators. But the fact that the exhibition showed the atrocities committed by common soldiers was a thing that rose huge discussions. I found it surprising at that time that these facts were still so heatedly debated. But this shows that, of course, exhibitions can play a vital role. Films, I think, either documentaries or also general films that tell a story that are not, well, fictional films can play also a vital role to raise awareness. Another example for that in Germany was the US film Holocaust, which was shown in Germany in the 1970s. It was about a German Jewish family and their fate during the Holocaust. And this film helped a lot, at least in Western Germany, to raise awareness for the fate of Jews during the Second World War. And now I think, now we are in the digital era, we should, of course, see what kind of new instruments do we have. Also to reach out to youngsters whom you might not address with classical exhibitions, whom you may no longer address with classical documentaries. So I think there is a constant need to look for new forms of commemorating the past and telling stories and raising awareness. And I think this is a challenge that will never end. I think this is a challenge that goes on. And I think it is very important that representatives from various groups from the public do work together. I think artists can play a vital role. And arts, of course, can really reach out to people. I think, of course, you have teachers, and I think it is very, very important to have teachers participating in these discussions about how to transmit the history to younger generations. Of course, it is also a political question. So you will have political representatives who should also take part in the discussion. And I think what is important maybe also is that it is not just about the clear-cut narratives that we should produce, but to let it be a process of negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is something that is needed, that has been important and still is and will be.
And the last question, I think, should be not easy also. Did you hear that the government of the Belarus started to use memory about Second World War as a tool for repression against the activists after the revolution of 2020? And now they made the solution, quite tricky solution, that the flag of the independent Belarus is the fascist flag, and now everybody who has this kind of flag, this is not true, of course, but they use the history like a tool to make repressions. It is totally other way of using the history, as you said in Germany, how to combine different point of views into some kind of dialogue and so on. But now this memory is using. I'm not speaking about Russia, where you see that because it's out of the frames of our discussion, of course, and this way. But I want to speak about the Belarus, and what you think. What way Belarusian organization, NGOs, I don't know, artists, political parties, if they are, how they can resist of using the history as a tool for repression, and what kind of partnership with German organization, Polish, I don't know, Lithuanian, everywhere where exists now a lot of people in exile from Belarus, what way of policy, what way of cooperation, how to resist for this?
Well, I think this is a very important question. And yes, I have been aware of the Lukashenko regime using these, let's say, fascist narratives now to delegitimize the opposition in Belarus. And by the way, our organization, the German Association for East European Studies, caters a so-called Forum für historische Belarus-Forschung, a forum for historical research on Belarus, which is a network of historians from Belarus and also from other countries. And we have paid special attention to this misinterpretation and fake interpretation of current symbols of the Belarusian opposition as classical fascist. And I think one thing, of course, is to give counter narratives. It is, of course, extremely difficult in the context of Belarus nowadays, because Belarus again has become so isolated, and I think all media channels are controlled by the state. So it is, I think, increasingly difficult to reach out. And if I see correctly, reaching out nowadays is only possible from outside Belarus. It is hardly possible for those who are still in Belarus and who, of course, see these fake information, but are not really able to act. But of course, this is really a vital question for those from outside. And of course, for instance, what we do is we have offered online lectures on the topic. and online lectures and discussions, online discussions in Belarusian language or translated into Belarusian language. So they are at least open for those who are interested in the topic and who are still able via internet to participate in these discussions. What else can be done? Again, I think here also, I think you need a combination of, let's say, journalists, artists, historians working together to think of ways how to counteract these fake narratives. I think this is a huge job, a very important job, and especially with Belarus as well as Russia stressing their victory over fascism as the one of the major achievements of the country. And in doing so, of course, do delegitimize the current opposition. Mm-hmm. And I think this example shows us so well how easy it is to consciously misinterpret history and use it for your own means. And this example also shows that your view on the past, your perspectives on the past are always related to how you self-position yourself as a state, as a society, also as individuals. But I'm afraid I don't have clear-cut solutions now how to counter these narratives, but I absolutely agree that this is a very important topic, but something that we also are occupied with in the framework of our Forum for Historical Belarus research.
Thank you very much. I think you gave us very deep-grounded answers. Maybe I don't ask you about something and you want something to add to our conversation.
No, I think we've touched upon a lot of aspects, and thank you for that. It was very inspiring for me as well, preparing for this talk. I found it very interesting to reflect on memory cultures in Germany over the last decades, and also, as I said, in West and East Germany. We did not talk here, and I think time is not sufficient now to touch upon it. We did not talk about the repercussions of security politics on memory cultures, but I think this would be a separate topic. So this is something which is also very interesting. And if I may add, at least at the end, the current Russian war against Ukraine shows us that we really should take historical narratives very, very serious. Because if we now look at the articles and official statements by the Russian leadership, and especially also by Vladimir Putin, we could have predicted the war against Ukraine far better if we had taken these statements as serious, not as true. Certainly not as true, but as serious statements.
It was also a big pleasure for me to have this conversation because you spoken very openly about very painful things for Germans, and I see how it's difficult from time to time about speak these pages of the history. And I know that there are many pages of the history which are not in the discussion because they are still so painful. And as Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians also, I would like to say that I think when the pages will be open, we will decrease the level of hateness because only closed pages, this is the background for conflicts.
Yeah.
Else the Gaza, else the, I don't know, Iran, Iraq, and so on.
Yeah.
So,
And I found your question about how this growing left-wing anti-Semitism, which, by the way, also is a kind of generation question. You have these. It's also to a certain extent a phenomenon among younger persons. How this will influence memory cultures in Germany is a very important question. I have no answer to it yet, but it is very important.
Thank you very much. I also thinking that our understanding of the history is the one of the main pillar or of existing conflicts or escaping from these conflicts. That's why we started this series of conversations. Thank you very much for participation, and I hope we will meet in some conferences and other events, and we'll continue, if we will be happy to, we'll continue this conversation in the future.
Thank you so much, Leonid. Thanks really for the opportunity to take part in your project, and it has been a great pleasure for me.
Thank you, and goodbye. Уважаемые друзья, спасибо, что вы провели это время с нами. Надеюсь, разговор с Габриэле Фрайтаг был для вас не только интересным, полезным, но навел вас на размышления. И я бы хотел, чтобы вы не сдерживали себя, комментировали, ругались, лайкали, дизлайкали в комментариях к нашему выпуску. Любая ваша реакция поможет дискуссии вокруг таких важных вопросов, как культура памяти, которые, на мой взгляд, являются тем топливом, который либо запускают конфликты в настоящем, либо могут найти ключ к какой-то к остановке конфликтов настоящего. Поэтому продолжайте оставаться с нами, а в следующем выпуске ждите нового спикера. До свидания.